Commander Thaddeus Drake stared through the viewport of his damaged survey vessel, watching crystalline spires pierce the violet skies of Lamaria. The emergency landing hadn't been part of his mission, but a catastrophic engine failure had forced his hand. As the ship's systems flickered and died around him, he could only hope the crystalline beings who called this world home would prove hospitable. The Lemurians had been discovered only recently by human deep space probes, and little was known about them beyond their crystalline biology and advanced technological achievements. No human had ever set foot on their world, until now. Drake ran a hand through his silver-streaked black hair, checking the environmental readings one final time. The atmosphere was breathable, if thin, and the temperature manageable. At least he wouldn't die immediately upon stepping outside. Small mercies. The landing zone erupted in a shower of prismatic light as Lemurian security forces surrounded his vessel. Their crystalline forms caught and reflected the violet sunlight, creating a dazzling display that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so threatening. Drake raised his hands slowly as the ship's airlock cycled open. "I come in peace," he called out, wincing at how cliché it sounded. "My ship suffered critical damage. I request emergency assistance and temporary sanctuary." The nearest Lemurian, its form a complex lattice of blue-white crystal, recoiled visibly. "It speaks," the being said, its voice like chimes in the wind. "And leaks organic fluids." Drake glanced down, noticing for the first time the blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Just a minor injury," he explained, reaching for a tissue to dab at the wound. "Do not move." The command came from a larger Lemurian whose purple-hued form seemed to pulse with authority. "You will remain still while we assess the contamination risk." "Contamination?" Drake frowned. "I assure you, I'm not carrying any pathogens harmful to crystalline life forms. My ship's medical scanners." Silence. The purple Lemurian approached, its faceted surface reflecting Drake's own image back at him in fractured patterns. "I am Chief Sentinel Vertex. You have violated Lemurian space and brought your organic corruption to our world. This is unprecedented." "Not by choice," Drake replied, keeping his voice level despite his growing concern. "As I said, my ship will be quarantined and studied, as will you." Vertex's crystalline form shifted, creating patterns that Drake assumed indicated disgust. "Guards, contain the organic. Maximum isolation protocols." Before Drake could protest, energy fields sprang up around him, forming a translucent bubble that lifted him from the ground. He watched helplessly as similar fields enveloped his ship, cutting him off from any chance of repair or escape. The journey to the Lemurian containment facility passed in a blur of crystal spires and disapproving faces. Drake noticed how the local population scattered at his approach, their crystalline forms vibrating in what he interpreted as revulsion. Clearly, the Lemurians' isolation had bred a deep aversion to organic life. The containment cell they placed him in was a marvel of crystalline engineering, its walls shifting and flowing to create necessary amenities as needed. Under different circumstances, Drake would have been fascinated by the technology. Right now, he was more concerned with surviving long enough to repair his ship and leave. "Remarkable," a new voice chimed, drawing his attention to the cell's entrance. A Lemurian stood there, its form more delicate than the guards, with swirling patterns of green and gold throughout its crystalline body. "I've never observed a living human before." "Glad to be of service," Drake replied dryly. "Dr. Prisma," the Lemurian supplied. "Lead researcher in xenobiology. Though I must admit, my experience with organic life forms is purely theoretical." Drake smiled, recognizing an opportunity. "Well, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Though I'd appreciate some answers of my own, starting with how long I'm to be kept in this cell." Prisma's form shifted, creating patterns that somehow conveyed embarrassment. "That is, uncertain. Your presence has caused quite an upheaval. Many fear you'll contaminate our world with your organic processes." "I understand their concern," Drake said carefully, but I assure you, I pose no threat. In fact, if you'll allow me to access my ship's database, I can provide extensive documentation on human biology and our previous peaceful contacts with other species. Fascinating. Prisma moved closer to the cell's barrier, studying him intently. You seem quite rational for an organic being. The common belief here is that your kind operates purely on primitive instincts. Drake suppressed a chuckle. We're full of surprises. For instance, did you know humans have made significant advances in crystalline computing? We might even be able to offer technological exchanges beneficial to both our peoples. This caught Prisma's attention. The Lemurian's form sparkled with what Drake hoped was interest. I shall bring this to the attention of the Council. Perhaps there is more to learn here than simply containment protocols. As Prisma departed, Drake allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He'd learned long ago that understanding often began with simple curiosity. If he could nurture that spark in Prisma, maybe he could change the Lemurian's view of humanity, and survive this unexpected first contact in the process. He settled onto the crystalline bench that had formed in his cell, watching the play of light through the violet sky outside. One way or another, his presence here was going to change things for both species. He just hoped the change would be for the better. Days passed in the crystalline cell as Drake worked to build trust with his captors. Prisma's visits became longer and more frequent, each conversation revealing the deep cultural divide between their species, and the potential bridges that could span it. Your respiratory process is remarkably efficient, Prisma noted, watching Drake through the cell's barrier. Though the constant need for oxygen exchange seems terribly inefficient compared to our photosynthetic processes. Different doesn't always mean inferior, Drake replied, demonstrating a series of breathing exercises. Our adaptability has allowed us to survive in countless environments. We've learned to turn apparent weaknesses into strengths. The conversation was interrupted by Chief Sentinel Vertex's arrival, the purple Lemurian's form pulsing with barely contained agitation. The Council requires your presence, Researcher Prisma. They are concerned about the amount of time you spend with the organic. Drake noticed how Prisma's crystalline form dimmed slightly. My research is providing valuable insights into human biology and culture. Commander Drake has been most cooperative. The human, Vertex cut in, is a potential threat until proven otherwise. Your fascination with it borders on inappropriate. Drake corrected firmly, standing to face Vertex. I'm a person, not an object. The sooner you accept that, the more productive our interactions can be. Vertex's form shifted to a deeper purple, a change Drake had learned to associate with anger. You dare to lecture me on productivity? Your very presence has disrupted our society. Reports of civil unrest are increasing. Some of our younger citizens have even expressed. Vertex shuddered, crystals chiming discordantly, curiosity about organic life. Is curiosity such a terrible thing? Prisma challenged, moving between Drake and Vertex. Commander Drake has shared knowledge of advanced crystalline computing techniques that could revolutionize our own technology. His people have experience with interspecial cooperation that could benefit. Enough. Vertex's command echoed through the crystalline chamber. The Council will hear your report, but I advise you to remember where your loyalties lie, Researcher. As they departed, Drake called out, Chief Sentinel. When Vertex paused, Drake continued, I understand your caution. But isolation breeds fear, and fear breeds conflict. There's another way forward, if you're willing to consider it. Vertex remained silent for a long moment before departing, but Drake noticed a subtle shift in the Lemurian's crystalline patterns, the first sign of uncertainty he'd seen in the security chief. Later that day, Drake received an unexpected visitor. A smaller Lemurian, its form shimmering with iridescent patterns, approached his cell cautiously. Is it true? The young Lemurian asked, voice chiming with excitement. Do humans really build ships that sail between stars? We do, Drake smiled, recognizing an opportunity to build another bridge. Would you like to hear about them? The young Lemurian, who introduced themselves as Echo, proved to be an eager audience. Soon, other young Lemurians began appearing, drawn by Echo's enthusiastic reports of the fascinating stories the humans shared. Drake found himself conducting impromptu lectures on human history, technology, and culture. Prisma returned during one such session, watching with obvious interest as Drake explained the principles of fusion drives to his rapt audience. "You have quite a following," she observed after the young ones had departed. "Kids are the same everywhere," Drake shrugged. "They haven't learned to fear what's different yet." "The council is divided," Prisma informed him. "Some see the value in what you've shared, others fear you're corrupting our youth with organic ideas." Her form sparkled with what Drake had learned was amusement. "Vertex is particularly troubled by reports that some young ones are attempting to mimic human gestures." Drake laughed, imagining crystalline beings trying to shake hands or wave. "Change is never easy. But it's inevitable. The universe is too vast and wonderful for any species to remain isolated forever." "Perhaps," Prisma agreed, her form shifting closer to the barrier. "There is something else. Our engineers have examined your ship. The damage is significant." "I suspected as much," Drake sighed. "Without proper repairs, I'm stuck here. Unless you're planning to simply exile me." "That was suggested," Prisma admitted. "But others, myself included, argued that helping you repair your vessel would provide valuable insights into human technology. The council has agreed to a compromise." "What kind of compromise?" "You will be allowed limited freedom to work on your ship, under strict supervision. In exchange, you will share your knowledge of crystalline computing and other relevant technologies." Prisma's form brightened. "I have been assigned as your primary liaison." Drake stood, hope flaring in his chest. "And Vertex?" "Will be in charge of security, naturally." The chief sentinel insisted. Prisma's tone carried a hint of apology. "Trust must be earned gradually, it seems." "It's a start," Drake smiled. "When do we begin?" "Tomorrow. For now, there is something else I wish to discuss." Prisma's form shifted, creating patterns Drake hadn't seen before. "Your explanation of human emotional bonds, it has raised questions I find myself unable to ignore." Drake settled back onto his bench, recognizing the importance of this moment. "Ask away. Understanding begins with honest dialogue, after all." As they talked through the night, Drake felt the barriers between their species beginning to crumble, one question at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, he was content to watch the play of light through Prisma's crystalline form and dream of a future where humans and Lemurians could stand together as equals. The first warning came during Drake's third week of supervised ship repairs. He was elbow-deep in the fusion drive's control systems, with Prisma observing nearby and Vertex maintaining a watchful presence, when the sky suddenly blazed crimson. "That's not normal," Drake muttered, emerging from the access panel. The violet sky of Lemuria had transformed into an angry red maelstrom, with waves of energy visibly rippling through the atmosphere. Vertex's crystalline form pulsed with alarm patterns. "A solar storm," the security chief announced. "But the magnitude, this is unprecedented." "Our shields will protect us," Prisma stated, though her tone carried an edge of uncertainty. "They always have before." Drake frowned, studying the readings on his portable scanner. "These energy levels are off the charts. Your shields might not be enough this time." He turned to Vertex. "I need access to your defensive control systems. Now." "Absolutely not," Vertex bristled. "Our planetary defenses are not for organic hands to." "Listen." Drake interrupted sharply. "Those energy waves are going to interact with your crystalline architecture in ways you haven't prepared for. I've seen similar phenomena before. Without proper modifications, your shields will shatter under the strain." Prisma moved closer, her form shimmering with concern. Is this true? The human speculates, Vertex dismissed. Our systems have protected us for generations. A tremendous crack split the air as one of the distant crystal spires fractured, its upper portion crumbling into glittering dust. Screams echoed through the city as panic began to spread. That was just the beginning, Drake warned. The main wave hasn't hit yet. You can either trust me now, or watch your world break apart around you. Vertex's form rippled with conflicting patterns before the security chief finally nodded. Come. But know that if this is some form of deception. It isn't, Drake assured him as they raced toward the defensive control center. Prisma, I need you to gather your best engineers. We'll have to work fast. The control center was a marvel of crystalline technology, but Drake had no time to admire it. His fingers flew over the modified interface Prisma had helped design, making rapid calculations as he explained his plan. Your shields are designed to deflect energy uniformly, he said. But this storm isn't uniform. We need to create dynamic resonance patterns that can adapt to the varying wave frequencies. Impossible, one of the Lemurian engineers objected. Our systems cannot be modified so quickly. They can if we apply principles of human crystalline computing, Prisma countered, her form bright with sudden understanding. Commander Drake's techniques for quantum resonance. Exactly, Drake nodded. But we'll need to channel the excess energy somewhere. Your primary crystal matrix, can it handle the strain? Vertex stepped forward. The matrix is sacred. To use it as a common power sink. Another crack echoed through the city, closer this time. Drake met Vertex's gaze steadily. Sacred or not, it's our best option for survival. The security chief's form shifted through a complex series of patterns before settling. Do it. What followed was a frantic race against time as Drake worked with the Lemurian engineers to modify their defensive systems. Prisma proved invaluable, bridging the gap between human intuition and crystalline technology. Even Vertex contributed, the security chief's detailed knowledge of the city's infrastructure helping them identify crucial power nodes. The main wave is approaching, Prisma announced, her form dimming with anxiety. 30 seconds until impact. Drake made a final adjustment. Shields are reconfigured. Power channels are open to the matrix. Now we find out if it works. The storm hit with devastating force. The sky turned to fire as waves of solar energy hammered against the planetary shields. Crystal spires groaned under the strain, their surfaces blazing with absorbed power. In the control center, displays flashed with warning patterns as the modified systems struggled to cope. The matrix is approaching critical capacity, an engineer reported. We cannot contain much more. Drake studied the energy flow patterns, mind racing. We don't need to contain it. We can use it. His fingers danced across the interface. Prisma, help me redirect the power flow. Instead of storing the energy, we'll cycle it through the city's systems in a controlled resonance pattern. Creating a feedback loop, Prisma caught on. The storm's own energy will reinforce our shields. The change was immediate. As the redirected power flowed through Lemuria's crystal architecture, the entire city began to glow with an inner light. The shields, instead of merely deflecting the solar storm, began to absorb and channel its power, growing stronger with each wave. Gradually, the crimson sky began to clear. The storm's fury spent itself against the reinforced defenses, leaving behind a city that hummed with newly channeled energy. As the last alerts faded, a strange sound filled the control center, Lemurians chiming in their equivalent of applause. Drake sagged against the control panel, exhausted but relieved. He felt a gentle touch on his shoulder and looked up to find Prisma beside him, her form glowing with admiration. You saved us, she said simply. We saved ourselves, Drake corrected, glancing at Vertex. Together. The security chief's form had taken on an unusual pattern, one that Drake realized, with surprise, indicated respect. Perhaps, Vertex acknowledged, there is something to be learned from organic adaptability after all. As the city began to recover, Drake knew that more than just lives had been saved that day. The crisis had proven that humans and Lemurians could work together, that their differences could become strengths when united by a common cause. It was a start. But as he caught the lingering looks from both Prisma and Vertex, he suspected it was only the beginning of a much greater change. The aftermath of the solar storm brought unprecedented changes to Lemurian society. Drake found himself no longer a prisoner but an honored advisor, working alongside Prisma and even Vertex to integrate human technological innovations with crystalline engineering. But peace rarely lasts long in the galaxy. The attack came without warning. Drake was in the middle of a training session with young Lemurians, Echo among them, when the first explosions rocked the city. Through the viewport, he watched in horror as sleek black ships descended from orbit, their weapons carving burning swaths through Lemuria's crystal spires. Raiders, Vertex announced grimly, bursting into the chamber. The Shadowclaw Consortium. They must have detected the energy surge from the solar storm. Drake's jaw tightened. He knew the Shadowclaws by reputation, pirates who preyed on isolated worlds, stealing resources and leaving devastation in their wake. Your defensive systems. Still recovering from the modifications we made during the storm, Prisma reported, her form flickering with distress. We cannot raise the shields to full power. Then we fight without them, Drake declared. He turned to Vertex. Your people have weapons. We are not warriors, the security chief responded, though Drake noticed their form had shifted to a more aggressive configuration. Our weapons are defensive only. Then we'll have to get creative. Drake's mind raced, analyzing options. The energy we channeled from the storm, is it still stored in the matrix? Prisma's form brightened with understanding. Yes, but using it as a weapon would require a complete reconfiguration of your city's power grid, Drake finished. I know. But right now, it's our best shot. Another explosion rocked the building. Through the windows, they could see Shadowclaw ground forces deploying, humanoid figures in black armor, moving with predatory grace. Echo, Drake called to the young Lemurian, get the others to safety. Prisma, I need you and your engineers at the power distribution hub. Vertex, he paused, meeting the security chief's gaze. I need your trust. Vertex's form shimmered with complex patterns before settling into a determined configuration. You have it. What is your plan? Working quickly, Drake outlined his strategy. They would use the stored solar energy not as a simple weapon, but as part of a massive resonance trap. The entire city would become one giant crystal circuit, turning the Shadowclaw's own movements against them. The next hours were a blur of desperate action. While Vertex's security forces engaged the raiders in hit-and-run attacks, Drake and Prisma reworked the city's power systems. The young Lemurians, led by Echo, proved invaluable, their smaller forms able to access maintenance tunnels adults couldn't reach. They're pushing toward the central matrix, Vertex reported, their crystalline form showing battle damage. Our defensive lines cannot hold much longer. We're almost ready, Drake assured them, making final adjustments to the control panel. Prisma. Power channels are aligned, she confirmed. But Drake, this much energy, channeled through the city's crystal structure, the resonance could shatter everything. It'll definitely shatter something, Drake agreed grimly. But if we've calculated correctly, their armor will resonate at a different frequency than your natural crystal. It's a risk we have to take. A massive explosion rocked the chamber. Through the smoke, armored Shadowclaw raiders poured in, weapons raised. Their leader, a tall figure in ornate black armor, stepped forward. Well, a metallic voice purred. A human. How unexpected. Working with these crystal creatures to protect their precious resources. Something like that, Drake smiled tightly, his hand hovering over the activation control. Last chance to leave peacefully. The Shadowclaw leader laughed. How noble. But we've already won. This city's defenses are broken, its warriors are weak. What could you possibly? Drake slammed his hand down on the control panel. Now. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Every crystal surface in the city began to vibrate, building to a resonant frequency that made Drake's teeth ache. The Shadowclaw's armor began to shake, the black metal vibrating at a devastating harmonic. What is this? The leader demanded, staggering as their armor betrayed them. Physics, Drake answered simply. Turns out crystal harmonics don't play well with your fancy armor. All around them, Shadowclaw raiders fell, their armor cracking and shattering under the assault of pure resonant energy. Those who could still move began a panicked retreat to their ships. The leader made one last attempt to raise their weapon, but Vertex struck them down with a precisely aimed crystal shard. As suddenly as it had begun, the battle was over. Drake quickly deactivated the resonance wave before it could cause more damage to the city. In the ringing silence that followed, he heard something unexpected: laughter. It was Echo, emerging from a maintenance tunnel with a group of young Lumerians. Their crystalline forms were vibrating with mirth. Did you see them run? Echo chimed excitedly. Their armor just fell apart. Using their own movement to power the resonance trap, Prisma marveled, her form glowing with admiration. Brilliant. Indeed, Vertex agreed, approaching Drake. The security chief's form had taken on a new pattern, one that combined respect with something deeper. You turned our perceived weakness into strength. Again. Drake shrugged, suddenly exhausted. That's kind of what humans do. We adapt, we improvise, and we protect our friends. Friends? Prisma moved closer, her form shimmering with complex emotions. Is that what we are? I'd like to think so, Drake smiled. After all, we just fought off space pirates together. That's got to count for something. The moment was interrupted by Echo's excited voice. Does this mean Commander Drake can teach us more about human battle tactics? And their ships? And their peace, young one, Vertex chimed, though their tone was gentle. I believe we all have much to learn from each other. As the city began to recover from the attack, Drake watched Lumerians and felt a profound sense of change in the air. The barriers of fear and distrust had been shattered more thoroughly than any pirate's armor. In their place, something new was growing, as strong and beautiful as the crystal spires that reached toward the violet sky.